This is Dr. Jeremiah Stevens. I'm a naturopathic physician who specializes in pediatrics. And in this video, I wanted to talk about food allergies. It seems to a lot of people that we're having a lot more allergies than we've ever had before. We're having more kids are showing up allergic to things. We're having more issues with just chronic ailments that a lot of times people find that when they cut out of food, they start to feel better. And so this video, I want to talk a little bit about some ways we can identify food allergies and a little bit what we can do about them. So like I said, it seems to be that we're having somewhat of an epidemic, and no one really knows exactly why. There's a few theories going around. Some of the things that I kind of will point to, and I'm not, there's no definitive answer on this, but one thing is that we're having some changes in our food supply. Historically, we've never eaten this much food all year long, the same food. Used to be we'd eat more seasonally, so you'd eat what was available at the time. Now you can eat the same food every day all year long, and so that could be playing into some of it. The food we're eating can sometimes be not as healthy as it used to be. We're eating a lot more processed foods, which could be compromising our digestive tracts, and I think that's a big issue. We use more antibiotics than ever in both ourselves, but also in our food supplies, animals, and those antibiotics will often pass down to us and cause some irritation, inflammation in our digestive tracts that are causing some problems. There's another theory going around called the hygiene hypothesis, and this is actually kind of an interesting theory that our digestive tracts were historically, we were exposed to a lot more parasites, and so we were always kind of fighting off these worms and flukes and parasitic things. So our immune system was really set up to fight that. And now with our clean water supplies and cleaner food supplies, we're not really exposed to parasites as much as we used to be, and that our immune system is revved up to go, and sometimes it can start attacking things that aren't necessarily harmful, and that's what happens in allergies. There's been some experiments actually of giving people parasites who have like real severe digestive problems and some improvements. I'm not advocating that at this point, but it's an interesting hypothesis, and that may be some truth. Again, some probably a combination of all these things and maybe some other factors as well that is kind of explaining what's going on. But in the meantime, until we figure out what's causing and what we can do about it, I think we should really see how we can identify these things and help our kids especially have much healthier times and less symptomatic issues from their foods they're eating. So quickly, some things can be allergy symptoms, and it can be a whole lot of different things. So here's a list here, including frequent illnesses, dark circles under the eyes. We call those allergic shiners. If a kid has really pronounced ones, oftentimes when I notice it first thing they walk in the room, and I go, okay, there's probably something they're eating here that's a problem. Constipation or diarrhea can be a sign if there's something on the digestive tract that could be potentially caused by food allergies. Obviously, there's other reasons for those things. Recurrent illnesses like ear infections, digestive problems, fatigue, hyperactivity, and behavioral problems can often be improved when we start cutting foods out. I've seen big changes on that front. If we can identify food allergy, kids start having their behavior improve, which is kind of exciting. Skin rashes, eczema, chronic eczema, often there's something that the child is eating that is causing a problem. So I'll often look into allergies as one of the first places to explore if someone has eczema. Asthma and chronic cough kind of fall in the same issue with eczema. It's sort of an inflammatory thing in the body, and it's coming out in different manifestations. So these are some different symptoms that could potentially be caused by an allergy. Obviously, allergies aren't the only reason for these symptoms. But if we're seeing some of these, sometimes I want to explore if there is something going on allergenic. This next slide talks about kind of the top food allergies that I've seen in my office, and I sort of group them in tiers. So tier 1 is the top, which would be wheat and dairy. I call them 1A and 1B of the allergenic world, especially for kids. So these seem to be the foods that set people off more than anything else right now. And so if I'm just being suspicious that there's a food allergy, and sometimes we'll look at these ones only first. And then we kind of move down to the next tier, which would be eggs, soy, and citrus. Tier 3 is sort of like the peanuts, tree nuts, and oftentimes those are the more serious allergies, kind of anaphylactic type stuff. And then tier 4 is sometimes it can be something really rare, and sometimes I run an allergy test and someone's off the chart on blueberries or something just random that I wouldn't expect. And we cut that out and symptoms start to improve. So there can be you can have really rare out there allergies, but generally, yeah, wheat, dairy, egg, soy, citrus are the ones I see the most coming into my office that people show improvements when they cut out. So there are several different ways to identify food allergens. I'm going to talk about the 3 most common ones that I see and what I use in my office. There's some different approaches out there as well, but just in the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about everyone. But the top 3 I see are 1 would be an elimination diet. 2 would be kind of going to an allergist and getting the skin prick testing, where they do a little scratch and put a little bit of a certain exposure on that and watch what happens. And then 3 is some kind of a blood test. So elimination diets are actually what we call the gold standard, because if you can pull a food out, see an improvement, put a food back in, and see it worsening again, that's a pretty clear indication that that is an allergy issue. So elimination diets can either be a single food, or if you or a couple foods if you suspect, like I said, like wheat and dairy are often the ones I'll do if I'm just doing a limited food elimination diet. Cut those 2 out and watch what happens. But there are also full elimination diets out there where you basically cut out all potential allergens for a period of 4 to 6 weeks usually. So it's kind of, you live on meats, which are usually pretty low allergenic, fruits, vegetables, except for the citrus fruits. I'll usually pull those out too. So you do rice and quinoa and beans, and you can live on that for 4 to 6 weeks. It's a little challenging, but it can be done. And then you kind of put the things back in one at a time on a systematic reintroduction, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video. So that is a good way to do it. It's definitely a little bit challenging to do these kind of elimination diets, and sometimes we don't find the right food on the first time, especially if we're doing one of these limited or single food eliminations. So it can take some time to do, but it's definitely a viable option, and the nice thing, it doesn't cost anything. It's just something we can try and do. So that's one place to go. The next line of testing we'll talk about is the skin prick testing, and that's often done by an allergist at their office. And you have to go in and do the test, and then we check back at a certain period of time afterwards and watch what reactions happen. So in my experience, what I've seen is the skin prick testing, it seems to be really good for inhaled allergens, environmental stuff like pollens, dogs, cats, dust, things like that. I have not always seen very consistent results with food allergens, unfortunately. So sometimes it will show up, but I've seen people come in with their reports that they print out from the allergist, which has gradings of reaction classes on these. And I've often seen that foods are showing up nothing, or they're showing up high. Basically, they show up with no allergen, but then when we do other testing or eliminations, they feel better, or they show up with a really high reaction, and then they cut that out, but they don't notice anything different. So sometimes it can be useful, but oftentimes I have not seen it be that perfect test for food allergy identification. Again, very valid often for inhaled stuff, so I will still recommend it for that. One of the negatives of the skin prick testing, it's time consuming, it's expensive, and it can be a little hard on the young kids to do all these little pokes, and so that's a problem as well. So that brings us to the third method, which is blood testing, and there's usually what we're looking for is the presence of antibodies against different foods in the blood. So there's basically 2 that are commonly used. The main one that traditional allergists and medical doctors will run is called an IgE test, and this is an antibody that is involved mostly in anaphylactic type reactions. So I will still run these IgE tests sometimes, but oftentimes I have people bring in their IgE reports again, and we look and there's nothing showing up reactive, and then we later identify a different food allergen that they feel significantly better, or do a different test and it shows up there, and again the same thing happens. So IgE is not always good for the subtle ongoing chronic allergy symptoms like we talked about earlier, like the runny nose, stomach aches, things like that. If someone's having anaphylactic reactions, chronic hives, throat closing, things like that, then yeah, IgE can be a really useful test, and I will run it in those cases. But in the more ongoing stuff, like I said, I often will use IgG testing, which is a more kind of ongoing, subtle, chronic allergen antibody. And so that's what we use. I use a lab called US Biotech. There's several different ones out there. I've just used them for 10 plus years, and I've had great clinical results with them, and so that's the one I use. And the nice thing about them and other IgG testing is it can be done off a skin prick, so we don't have to do a full blood draw, which is great for kids. So I've run hundreds of these on little kids, and it's it can be a little tough for a few minutes or so when you just poke their finger, but usually most of the time the kids do really well with the test, and often don't even realize what's kind of going on until it's over. So So I think that this is a useful test, and most integrated practitioners that I see use IgG testing for the best results, and that's what we found works. So again, it can often find allergens that other tests do not find. I've seen it, I don't know, 50 times plus where people have other allergy reports from skin prick testing or IgE testing, and then we come in, we do the IgG testing, and it finds an allergen that causes that when we cut out, people get significant improvement. So again, that finger stick is nice, and Another nice thing is the reports will give us sort of a relative degree of antibody class reaction. The US Biotech uses a 0 to 6 scale. Other labs use a different scale, but that gives us some relative differences between different reactions. So that can be useful when we kind of going over the reports. So kind of how I interpret these when we get the results back, we get a nice graph. The one we uses 96 different foods, so we have a wide variety of different things. So anything that shows up on the IgG testing, especially if you have less than 5 allergens, usually what I'll recommend is cutting them out for a period of 4 to 6 weeks. So we do a little more targeted elimination diet. And then we watch and see what happens, what improves, and then we do some systematic reintroduction, putting things back in one at a time, and watch for symptoms to return. So this is one thing that I've seen work pretty well. If the IgG testing has a problem, what I find is that sometimes we'll over-identify allergenic foods, and so we'll get sort of these false positives. So we cut something out and we don't notice it, and we put it back in, there's no problem, then that's okay, we can keep that food in. Sometimes, again, if we see lots of allergens, like over 5, that means that the digestive tract is really inflamed. And often what's going on is there's 1 or 2 more primary allergens, and the other allergens are showing up secondarily to that because there's inflammation. And so we're generating antibodies against a whole lot of things. So if there's a lot of things showing up, usually we can't cut out everything, obviously, so we'll kind of cut out the biggest, highest allergenic ones for a period of time, and then again do the systematic reintroduction afterwards. So, and then also in the meantime doing some targeted digestive repair, which I think is really important to get the body to be able to heal and hopefully work some of these foods in, so it's not a lifelong thing where you have to avoid these foods. So how do we reintroduce foods? After, again, 4 to 6 weeks, we'd like to see some sort of improvement happen. So, whatever one of the symptoms that we're really working with, we'd like to see it moving in the right direction, if not clearing up altogether, which is obviously the best case scenario. And then what we want to do is challenge a food every 72 hours. So if we're challenging wheat, usually we'll have you eat something breakfast, lunch, and dinner that has wheat in it, either bread or cream of wheat or something like that. And then we want to wait for up to 72 hours. Obviously, if you get a reaction when you first wheat meal right away, that's a problem. You don't have to keep going. But if we don't see any reaction, eat it 3 times and then wait up to 72 hours for any delayed response. If we see no problems at all, then you can keep that food in the diet and move on to the next food that you're going to be challenging at that point. If something does show reaction, again, that doesn't necessarily mean a lifelong sentence, so oftentimes what I'll recommend is cutting it out for a period of like 3 to 6 months and then try to reintroduce again. And sort of keep doing that every 3 to 6 months, keep challenge the food again, just to see, because oftentimes if the body is avoiding something for long enough, it can start to heal up, but we can start to see improvements. So when I reintroduce foods, I like to sometimes challenge different parts of a food separately, because sometimes people can tolerate a certain component of the allergen and not the whole entire thing. Obviously, if you're having real severe reactions, you probably don't even want to do any subtypes at all. But if it's sort of minor reactions that we're dealing with here, we can try to challenge things separately. So for dairy, I like to challenge milk separate from cheese, separate from yogurt. If you can handle milk, generally you can handle all the other ones. But if you can't tolerate milk, sometimes you can tolerate cheese, sometimes you can tolerate yogurt. The processing, of making those foods sometimes changes the proteins enough that it becomes not a problem for people. And then in some cases, other people can tolerate evaporated milk, where they can't tolerate regular milk, and that's more useful for baking. You wouldn't really want to drink evaporated milk, but it gives you an option you can kind of work in for cooking purposes. Wheat, sometimes I will have people challenge sprouted wheat and kamut separate from wheat flours. Oftentimes wheat flours can be the worst problematic one, but kamut is kind of an older strain of wheat. It's called like Khorasan wheat is another name for it, and it's been around. It's more similar to how wheat used to be before we kind of changed it into its modern form. And then sprouting the wheat sometimes will use up enough of the gluten and proteins that some people can tolerate as well. So those are things you can try if you're not tolerating the wheat. Again, if you're tolerating the wheat on introduction, you're probably fine on the other ones. And then with eggs, I'll often challenge egg white and egg yolk separately. Usually the white is the more allergenic part of the egg, and the yolk is not as allergenic, but again, sometimes people can be allergic to both. So then, like I said, these aren't necessarily life sentences. So there are ways to heal up your digestive tract. So hopefully we can put these things back in. So again, usually I like to challenge every 3 to 6 months, and usually after anywhere from 3 to 24 months, it depends on the person. Oftentimes a person can be able to tolerate putting these foods back in on somewhat limited basis, kind of a rotation, maybe once or twice a week initially, maybe even a little more after that. But again, kind of always watching that the symptoms that we were originally trying to clear up aren't coming back. And then, while we're avoiding these foods, I like to focus on some digestive repair approaches. So I'll do a lot of things with different nutrients and different diet approaches. I'm probably gonna make another video on that. But some different things I'll often do is, keeping the allergy away, and that sometimes alone is enough to help the system start to heal, but it's not getting a constant inflammation. Probiotics, increasing healthy fats can often heal the digestive tract. The digestive tract needs a lot of fats actually to heal. Bone broth soups, I like some of the GAPS diet principles you can look into. Fermented foods help, again, it's kind of the probiotic stuff. And then sometimes I'll use specific amino acids and nutrients, things like glutamine and acetylglucosamine, and butyrate for the colon specifically. So those are different nutrients sometimes we'll use to help heal things up. The hope would be that at some point we can work these foods back in. So that's this video. I hope you learned something, and shoot me some comments if you have any specific questions, and we can make a dialogue about this stuff. We're constantly learning more and more about allergens and how they're affecting the body. I've really seen some dramatic changes around with people if you can get out of the allergenic loads, and kids start to just thrive again where they had been struggling in certain areas. So unfortunately, I think it's something that's real and we need to deal with right now, but this is it's definitely an area that we can see some big improvements. So take care. I hope you have a great rest of your day.